Alright, welcome back. Hopefully it is 10:11 p.m. October 7th, 2017. This will probably be the fourth time I'm trying to post this video. I have to keep doing it because the data keeps changing. I'm really sorry about that. I was trying to keep people posted on Instagram and in the comments, but here we are. I hope this uploads. As of right now, guys, our first landfall has happened basically in the Mississippi Delta, which is part of Louisiana. The one good thing about this is that the Mississippi Delta is a lot of muddy swampland. It had some old oil rigs on it that were actually, I believe, taken out by Katrina years ago, and they just never rebuilt the area. So that is a decent bit of news. It is about to move to a second landfall. It's crossing into the water between Louisiana and now the border of Mississippi. It's expected to be around Gulfport and Bullocks, Mississippi. I'm going to show you a chart for that really quick. All right, I'll zoom in a little bit more here. Sorry about that. And basically, okay, so Mississippi Delta right in this area here, right to the east of Grand Isle, which is about here, still with those tropical storm warnings to the west all the way to Morgan City, and we still have those tropical storm warnings for New Orleans. Now, I don't see New Orleans getting anything really super bad. The only issue is with the counterclockwise spin of these storms. Even though it's a Category 1, it fell back down to 85 miles an hour, which is a good thing considering the situation. We have that counterclockwise spin, so the only issue I feel for New Orleans, for those of you asking, is the counterclockwise spin eventually is going to be pulling that water across the face of Bullocks right here, and it's going to pull into these inlets and stuff, so it may bring a little bit of flooding into the area of New Orleans. At least New Orleans is blocked by this little bit of a catcher's mitt looking deal here. So if anything, the water will be pulled in this way, and maybe a little bit of rise in water in this area here. More than likely not affecting New Orleans that bad, besides the wind and rain that's coming that we have expected. Now, I do have some wave heights for you. This chart here is updated, I believe, as of 9 o'clock, so about an hour and 14 minutes ago this was released, so these may be changing a little bit, but I was watching a webcam in Mobile, Alabama, showing the coast there, and there were some pretty big waves, so that does add up to about what I'm seeing here, 16 foot, maybe not 16, they were probably like 12, 10, 11, 12 feet, give or take, but we got to remember the storm is just passing over Mississippi Delta now, and it does have sort of a north-northeast movement, which is why we're talking about Gulfport being still in the path of this. If you remember, we showed that right around here is Gulfport, actually more towards this area in the west. So that's why we have these deep purples here. That's still the hurricane warning. This is still a hurricane. It is still moving inland. Believe it or not, there is a possibility that between the time it leaves Mississippi Delta here, it is in water again. So what I think is going to happen is I don't think it'll get any stronger, but it'll maintain that 85 miles an hour, at least until it gets to the second landfall here. And then we will see a decrease in wind speed. This thing is bringing a lot of rain. There are rain totals that I really don't like to see because of a few things. One is the jet stream that is flattening over the lower part of the U.S. now. I'm going to bring that up on this water, or the water vapor chart we use. You can kind of see it in the first couple frames. You see this long line here. This is that front that we've been watching that we expected to earlier in the day begin to move this storm to the east. That's why a lot of those models, if you remember, once it shot the gap here, even if it did hit Cancun, it showed it wrapping up a little bit to the northwest and then making that northeast turn. Now, that didn't happen as scheduled, and because of that, that's why we're having our first landfall in the Mississippi Delta, as opposed to where it was said to hit more towards Alabama, Mobile to be exact. That was where landfall was supposed to be, right at the mouth of the Mississippi River there, which still will see flooding. There's no doubt about that, based on the speed the storm is moving. Now, this was officially the fastest storm as far as its path speed, not wind speed, obviously, it's a Category 1, but the fastest storm ever as far as its path goes which added some good things and some not so good things. The good parts about it, guys, is that because of this speed, because of the speed this storm traveled, that's the reason this thing did not become a Category 4 or 5 storm. This thing had all the potential in the world to do that based on the warm water, the conditions around it, zero shear winds. There was no shear winds with this storm. That's usually rare. When you start getting into the United States with these storms, there's always shear wind issues. But as you can see, the only possibility for shear wind was this jet stream dip here, which didn't get there in time. Had it happened down here more, we would see that northeast shift more, and that's why areas of the panhandle were really at risk earlier in the day. One other thing I pointed out in some of the earlier videos was the tornado situation that already did begin. We actually had a tornado spotted with debris. I believe it was in the north area of Alabama, if I'm not mistaken. It could have been a little bit more north. I'm going to have more data on the tornado situation. Now, once this thing makes its second landfall, in between, right around Gulfport, I want to say, is where it's going to be. I don't see it moving that much more west based on the speed it's going. Again, we see that jet stream line coming across. It got held up a little bit again in the same exact spot where, if you guys remember that storm, Tropical Storm Pilar, when we were following, I believe it was Jose, Pilar held up the jet stream for almost a week. We were waiting when we had that really crazy heat wave in the northeast the last week in October when we were still watching Jose, and we were waiting for that for days and days and days to push Jose out of the area of New York and New Jersey. And same situation happened here, guys. It's really, really interesting. This system here in Mexico, believe it or not, caused the jet stream, which is well over 2,000 miles long across the U.S., to be held up at the bottom, and it only allowed the top part to begin to flatten out. And you can see it now. It's right around there, and now that it's touching this area, now that those outer bands are reaching the jet stream, it's beginning to influence it, and now you're going to be seeing that northeast shift. And that's why these areas of Atlanta and even little parts north up into almost Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is pretty crazy, right through West Virginia, right near Pittsburgh, had those tropical storm wind warnings, which I think some of them still have, because this storm is going to hit land. It's moving very fast, so it's going to stay tight in a consistent area, and it's going to move up to the northeast and basically follow this line up. So eventually areas like West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and even New York at some point is going to feel some not so good weather from this. It won't be anything dramatic or crazy. It'll be like a rain and your windy storms, that type of deal. But that's what we're dealing with now as far as inland goes. But once this thing does get in this area right around here, I want to say, you're going to start seeing these tornadoes spinning off. They could be going on in Georgia, South Carolina, the west side of South Carolina, and the west side of North Carolina, possibly all the way up to Virginia. You never know with this because of the speed. Again, it's been a long time since we've dealt with a storm that moved this fast. It's actually the fastest one, I believe, on record. I think that's with the Atlantic and Pacific put together, which is very interesting. Even though this wasn't a super strong storm, it is causing a lot of storm surge. We do have some crazy storm surge numbers still that are updated a couple hours ago that are still very consistent with what we saw earlier in the day. I'm going to show you those now. All right, and once again, I just wanted to point something out that I forgot earlier with this tornado situation. Again, because the storm is now being influenced by the jet stream here, you can see that line there. That's water vapor being pulled apart. Just because you don't see water vapor doesn't mean that force isn't there. So picture this as a wall. It's moving across and it's beginning to flatten out because it's being held up down in this area in central Mexico in the Pacific Ocean. You can see it connects there, and then that system is beginning to move into the west side of New York and the west side of Pennsylvania. So again, this storm is going to come up through Mississippi Delta, which is already touching. It's going to be in this gap here, which is going to keep its strength probably as is, which is why they're still concerned about the Gulfport areas. And then moving forward, we may see tornadoes as far north as Alabama, areas like Montgomery, a little bit more to the east in Columbus even. And then we have Birmingham. And even Atlanta, guys. Atlanta's still under that tropical storm wind warning, so we may see tornadoes in that area. Again, it's going to be closer to those flat plain areas. Within those areas, we have Huntsville up there, and then even Chattanooga as far as there. There's an airport right near Chattanooga that has a website that was reporting possible tornado activity. So again, because of the speed of this storm and its counterclockwise spin, you're going to see a lot of these tornadoes happening on the east side of the storm. The bands will come across like this. Some of them will break off into their own strip storms, like you can kind of see over Florida like that. Picture those happening up in this area, and as you get into those deep storms, which they are showing, not so much on the visible satellite because it's dark now, but you can see in the water vapor charts, you see little puffs going on. Those are usually strong storms, and within those storms, you start seeing the rotation. And again, there was a tornado. I forget exactly where it was. I feel bad not having that information for you, but I will in the next update. This one's basically just to make sure I can upload. I've been having real issues uploading the last part of the day here. But those tornadoes are going to be a big issue now. You're going to be hearing a lot about that, especially once this thing is completely over land. And again, because of the speed, it's going to stay intact, at least for a while, probably moving up parallel with Georgia. The north end of Georgia before it starts really breaking up. This system's going to move all the way up the northeast, guys. So the whole northeast is going to feel rain and wind from this over the next 4 or 5 days. Maybe a little sooner than that. Maybe 3 days, 3 or 4 days because of the speed. Plus the jet stream pushing it out is going to help too. They're already talking about how within the next 8-9 hours it's going to be sunny and like almost like nothing ever happened here except for whatever damage we get from the storm surge and the wind. A few other things I really think we need to start paying attention to. Obviously, main concern is what Nate is doing currently. We still have a little bit of time before it makes that second landfall. We are still seeing those deep reds puffing up. There's one there, and actually this isn't totally updated yet. Maybe this one is. Yes, okay, so that first chart I showed you here, it shows that first puff right by Mississippi Delta, and then the frame cuts off there. But in this one, you can see there's that second one. So you can see that this thing's not going to lose strength, at least in between this gap here, and that's why those areas are under those warnings still. So we still have that explosion of storms there. It's going to get pretty rough in these areas, but that should be it as far as this thing's still trying to regenerate. Again, we never know with this weather, guys. This storm did break records, believe it or not. Even though it's a Category 1, the fastest moving storm we've had almost ever. I'm pretty sure at this point it's the fastest storm we've ever had as far as how fast it's moving. It covered a lot of ground. We all know that part. So I am going to at least monitor this for the next 2 hours to see what this landfall is going to be like near Gulfport. Again, it may be shifting a little bit to the east near Bullocks, Mississippi, and then the mouth of the Mississippi River also. Really quick, guys, before I let you go and before we get on to our next update, the Canadian model is showing, like I showed you before, we got a 70% chance of cyclone formation in the middle of the Atlantic right now. Now, of course, that looks bad, but the good part about it, at least for the U.S., not for areas of Ireland and London and stuff like that, this looks like it's going to form, but it looks to me like the jet stream, it's going to flatten out and then reconnect up in this area, and it looks to pull this storm way up to the northeast, which is a good thing. But we still may get a named storm out of this. It may be a name. It may be Ophelia. If it does become a tropical storm, they won't name it Ophelia if it's a tropical depression. It's got to cross over to tropical storm. So we may see her come and go really quick, but then again, we may not. There's a few things that, remember I pointed out this system here that's beginning to worry me. If this pulls south by Puerto Rico and then gets stunted by this weather coming up off South Africa, we could see some spin going on here, especially with the jet stream being so high, and you'll see that in this next chart. I pulled up the CMC model. This thing gets a little dramatic. This is pretty nuts. There's 3 systems that come off of the west coast of Africa, and then we have our system that forms here, the 70% that will more than likely be Ophelia, but again, more than likely won't affect the U.S. So I'll move forward here. You see Nate move right up into Mississippi Delta and then into Mississippi itself. And then we have our 70% possibly Ophelia here. But then you see this system and this one here. Again, most of these, if not all, are projected to get picked up and pushed out towards Ireland, believe it or not. But here, this system here is probably what I was looking at as far as the system here. If you look again, it's right here. It looks to be moving south, maybe a southeast direction. It looks like it's going to get stopped by this this northern movement coming off the South Africa and then reform here. I'll go back to the CMC to show you. So if I move forward, you can see right there. So that may be that system that comes down, gets pushed back up by the northern momentum off South Africa, and then forms here. But again, a good thing is that these storms look, except for the fact that if this thing gets pushed out this way, it looks like a Fujiwara actually keeps it moving to the northeast. Once I move forward here, you can see this would be Ophelia if it gets named, immediately getting pulled up to the northeast. The other two systems that come off of the west coast of Africa also get pulled up in this direction. And then the one that looks like it's going south over Puerto Rico and then pushed up by the weather in South America. Sorry, stumbling today. And then they get pulled up north, and that would be that. Now, we got to wait and see. There's still a lot of time before these can form, or what the high pressures and the jet stream are going to do in the next coming days. But again, main concern is Nate right now and its effects on the coast. If this thing uploads correctly, I'll be immediately working on another update for you guys shortly. Thank you so much for your patience, guys. I'm going to get this up as soon as I possibly can. Thank you all very much.